This is, I think, a scene from the Indian schools, as they were called, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, the Indian schools were headed by people who were products of their own culture, you know, and there was only one way to do it, you know, and that was to beat education into Native people and beat their culture out of them. And you can see how happy they were. Not too.
Well, and it's also included, of course, the imposition of English and the eradication of the indigenous languages.
Well, it's really a shame because, I mean, I speak Tshimsian, but I don't speak it like I would like to speak it. You know, it helps me in writing songs and talking. I was lucky to be raised with my grandfather in my grandfather's home, but not a lot of people my age or younger who speak our language, and it's really unfortunate because the older folks are dying off, you know, and we need to really hold on to language. I think language is really important for preserving the culture.
What are we looking at on this one?
Well, this was a group of councilmen from my village waiting on the dock to greet President Harding in 1923 when he came to visit my village. That person standing with the my great-grandfather is in the middle of that picture. I don't know what that little hat's called. What's that?
The bowler? And
no, right in between. It's the flat hat. Yeah, that guy.
Just simply a cap.
Yeah, that's my great-grandfather was one of the councilmen who met President Harding. And it was the reason I included these contrasting slides was to illustrate at the time that our people were wearing clothes like this, many other Northwest Coast Indians were wearing blankets, you know, and living in traditional manner, where the people in my village, moving with the missionary and building this Christian industrial community, had given up all of the old ways. And then totem poles and the culture figuratively, literally fell over and went away. You know, and not completely with every tribe, but with ours it did. And I've been having to reach back 4 generations to do what I do and to research. It's very difficult when you don't have older people to learn from, you know. It's not their fault. You know, my mother's generation were sent away to schools and more or less were made to not take our culture as a priority, and actually, and some of them to be ashamed of who they were, and grew up, not their fault at all, but grew up ignorant of the old ways. And scenes like this with the poles falling over could have been the foreteller of the dying culture, you know? But I'm glad it hasn't been that way, even though we had to go through a downtime in order to get back to where we are now.
When did the cultural renaissance sort of come about? Any particular point, or?
Well, you know, for a long time, the only place you could really see a good collection of our totem poles and our culture was by going into a museum. In fact, I'm astounded, and I was just in a museum back east just this last week, and it's amazing how much of my culture, our culture, is in a museum somewhere else. You know, there's more in one museum than you'd ever find in the whole area of the villages that I'm from. So,
still very, very wonderful things. At least certainly not appropriate, I think, to have had that much great artwork confiscated. But I suppose lucky that it's still being preserved.
Well, yeah, there's 2 ways to look at it. You know, being an artist, I'm very grateful that the anthropologists did collect what they did, because a good deal of it would probably have rotted away in the ground and or been destroyed and or been sold off. So I'm sad that it's all in New York and in Washington, D.C. and Ottawa and all these other places, when it should be in our village, in our own museums, you know, or in the hands of our own people, you know. And to some extent, it's beginning to be back with us again. Villages are building their own container buildings for these. Totem poles went the way of granite monuments. Our people still put up granite monuments in graveyards to circumvent the laws of not being able to put totem poles up. And now, you know, we're teaching, again, these are some students of mine that are learning how to carve totem poles again. And not that I'm the only one teaching it, you know, there's been quite a, as you say, quite a renaissance or quite a rebirth of the culture since the 50s and 60s. And the 70s really, since the 70s, it's really, oh, there's an old slide. We don't need that one.
Yeah, it's perhaps a good reminder that some inappropriate things happen.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who are doing the art are teaching others. And I think that's really important for Native people to teach other Natives, you know, to share it, so that even though you could call our people, and around the turn of the century, really progressive with this, with the Christian industrial values, we gave up an awful lot. We gave up our culture to advance ourselves in the non-native eye.
Well, I think when the Europeans came, as I say, there was a tremendous amount of misunderstanding that went along with it, and some of it intentional on their part, perhaps a lot of it intentional on their part, and it's just a different worldview, as you say, the industrial versus the natural, and I don't think they ever really comprehended how much wealth, intrinsic wealth there was with the cultures that were along the coast. They were materially as better off, or certainly better off than most of the people in Europe.
I would say, Bill Reed once said, only a stupid man would starve on the Northwest coast. It's like the table's set, you know, depending on where you are and what time of the year it is. My son and his generation, I have great faith that's him in the middle there dancing with some people, or kids from his age group, his friends. I think I have a lot of confidence that he's going to be, he and his generation are going to carry it on, so that when we're elders, they'll be the standard bearers of our culture. It's amazing. And then the art too. You know, the art is being carved new. You know, I mean, there are lots of people carving now, and totem poles are being made by contemporary artists and raised for the same reasons they were raised 100 years ago, you know, and 150 years ago. Now, I began carving about 16 years ago. I taught school for a number of years. I was a basketball coach and a PE teacher, and picked up carving as something that seemed like a natural course of events, because I painted and drew for most of my life, and I've always been interested in my own culture. And the first totem pole I did was a short pole, a 7-footer, to honor my grandmother. I carved it within the year after she died, and I guess I've gone on from there. It's 43 poles later. I've done poles of many different sizes and all over the world.
Well, the image that we just saw, that was the original pole, was it not?
Yeah, that was the first pole. Yeah. It's standing on the porch of my grandfather's house right now.
Wow. And I think we've got some other images as we go along that illustrate, you know, kind of how you go about this.
This slide, that's my son David, and he's been a big influence on me, and just wanting to make sure that I had something to pass on to him other than my name. You know, he's going to own a good deal of my regalia and my Indian names, and he's learning to sing and dance in the language. And, these poles that you're going to see now, they're various sizes and locations. These are items from a potlatch, the very first potlatch ever given in my village in 1982. There was a one-day event. It was really a scary thing, because the day before, it was quite an educational experience for everybody, including me, but the day before we had this this potlatch, a person stopped me on the street in Metlakatla and asked me when was my potluck. Oh man, that scared me, you know, but it worked out okay though. It was a learning experience for everybody, but